Welcome. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a new build with Team Build. What we need to do that is a working version of TFS 2013, a controller and agent based on Team Build 2013, and an application that we'll need to build. What I'll do in this video is we'll look at the layout and source control of an application, and then we'll create a new build definition. Finally, we're going to queue that build, and we're going to look at the layout of the build at the end. So first we open Team Explorer and open Source Control Explorer and then navigate to our project. So my project currently is under the dev branch, under source. I have my solution and I have the rest of my project. Now I open that under Visual Studio. You can see that it's a very simple website with a default ASPX page and a web config. So in order to build this, I will go under Team Explorer, and then I will select the build node off of Team Explorer. From here, I can just click on the new build definition. This will open the new build definition wizard, and then we can actually just start filling those sections. So let me explain all those sections as we need to create the build. So first then we need to give it a name. So I'm going to call it demo website.simple. We can also put it as enabled, paused, or disabled right away. The trigger section has 5 different modes. The first mode is manual, where you actually just basically right-click and trigger a new build. The second mode is for continuous integration, in which every time somebody does a check-in in the workspace that we're going to set up for our build, it's actually going to trigger a new build. The next one is for rolling builds. Rolling builds essentially is very similar to continuous integration, but they will basically run the build, and once the first build finishes, it's going to start a new build with the accumulation of all the check-ins that happen during the previous build. So this is usually a mode that's used because your build take a long time to do, and you don't want to just basically pile them up with 30-minute builds all to the rest of the day. So basically continuous integration is not really good in that fashion. So we use rolling builds. The fourth mode is gated check-in. This essentially is a mode where when the developer does a check-in, instead of doing the check-in, it does a shelf set. The build then triggers, does a get latest, applies the developer shelf set on top of it, builds the build, and if the build succeeds, the build server will check in instead of the user. Finally, the last mode is schedule. So schedule basically is you pick the days and you pick the time to actually just basically run a build. You can also run a build if nothing changed. So if you want to have a build every day, even if nothing changed, you can actually just tick this box over here. The next node is the actual workspace that will trigger the build or the information that will actually be used as part of the build, and basically anything that gets checked in that location, the workspace location, will trigger a CI build if that occurs. So I'm actually going to remove this. This is more for via Visual Studio Online. I can then basically choose which source folder I actually want to use to build. In this case, I want my demo website. The source dir over here is basically a parameter that will be replaced in the build to actually save it on our build, to create the workspace on our build agent. So the recommendation is never to change those things. And if we go under action here and look at our controller and our agent, and we actually look at our properties, this location, the working directory, is where this workspace will actually be created. So if you need to change this because you need more space, or the space on the build server is on the E drive or some other drive, you can change that over here, but then all of the build definition that actually use source dir will be affected by this, which is exactly what you want to do. Next is our build default section. We can choose a different controller if we want to. We can take the default, then we need to actually save our build into a drop folder. So we can decide not to create a drop folder. This is not really recommended. Then we can actually select a share to actually put our build in. And then finally, we can actually copy the build output to the server. This is more for, again, Visual Studio Online. So the recommendation is more to actually just basically put it on the drops folder here, or any other share that works for you. Next is our build process. In the build process, we can decide to pick another template. The default template is fine for our current build, but if we wanted to choose an upgrade template, a lab template, or even a release management template, we can actually do that from the different templates here. Those templates can be edited and modified. The recommendation is not to do that. Next, we're going to talk about the different sections. So the first section is about version control. So essentially here is we want a clean workspace. We could take basically here a different change set. So if we want to build a previous change set, something from the past, or a label in particular, then we can actually just pick a new version here. We can decide to label or not label our source when we actually do the get at the beginning. The next section is the build section. Here we basically choose the solution we want to build. So if I open this, we can see that we currently have the solution that was opened in Visual Studio. Here I can actually add different solutions. I only have one here, but if I had more, I could add them over here. I can put them in the order they need to be built. So if I need to build something first, I can open multiple solutions here and build them all in a row. Next is the different configuration. So here I can say that for this build, I only want to run, I only want to build the debug and any CPU platform and configuration. And I can add multiple ones. If I do, then the build will be run multiple times for each one of the configuration I'm interested in. In this case, I'm not going to put anything, and it's actually going to take the default that's in the solution. So in this case, the default is debug any CPU. So that's the one that's going to be built. Here is I want a clean build. The next section is the output location. So there are currently 3 locations. The single folder means replace the outdir and essentially just put everything under the bin folder. The per project is if we have multiple projects in our solution, there's going to create a single directory for each project and put the binaries in there. The as configured is the version where essentially nothing gets moved. So basically it's going to compile like Visual Studio. So it'll create a bin debug and bin release. And from there, we're actually going to have to do the work to copy stuff over into our bin folder. If we don't do that, there's going to be nothing in the bin folder except for our logs. So in this instance, I'm actually going to use a single folder parameter. In a further video, we're actually going to try the as configured, and we're going to use a post build script to actually modify that. Speaking of post build script, the advanced section basically has the MS build arguments if we need to put any. Then it has a post and a pre-build scripts. In this case, we're not going to do anything. The test section basically has if we want to run some automated tests or not. So in this section, I can actually open and decide to automate my tests with different parameters. So if I edit this, you can see that I can actually run them with the Visual Studio Test Runner. It's basically going to look for star test star.dll in the output folder. If it finds anything that has some test cases in there, test classes, it's actually going to execute them. So from here, I could also enable code coverage if I wanted to do that and change the platform if needed. So I'm just basically going to leave the default here. I don't have any tests in my project, so nothing's going to happen. But if I did, then it would actually run that. Here, I can actually disable my test if I need to. I can disable test impact analysis. I'm going to leave the default as they are. And as you can see, we also have a pre and post build script in here as well. And in here, basically would be like, I don't know, create a database and run your test and then delete the database so that you always have the same database with the same values in it. So your tests are always going to return the same things unless there's obviously a problem. So this is the test section. In the symbol section is where we're actually going to put a share that Team Build will use to publish the PDBs after it indexes them. And that's going to be very important when we start using IntelliTrace. Finally, the last section is the advanced section, in which we're going to basically pick up a build number, and this is the default. As you can see, based on different parameters, we have a lot of macros that we can use to define what our build number is. We can actually hard code a number in here if we need to. We're actually going to use this, modify this section a little bit more in the next video. Finally, this section here is create a work item on failure. So I don't want to actually create a new work item. I'm just going to make this false. Basically, this would be that if our build fails, create a new bug in TFS that we can follow and fix and all that. So in my case, because I'm actually just creating a brand new build, I don't want to create a new bug until this actually works. And once it does, then I can actually change that. Finally, the last section is the retention policy section. In this section, we decide if our triggered and manual build, how many we're actually going to keep until they start rolling. So when what it means by rolling is that once you hit the, in this case, 10th build, so you build the 11th one, the first one will be dropped. And what happens when build are drop is what happens here. So it's going to remove the details and drop the labels and the symbols, but we can basically specify what we actually want to delete when the rolling build comes around. So it's always a good thing to keep the test results in our case. We don't really need the actual drop and the symbols, but the test results and the labels are always interesting in order to be able to recreate our builds. So we're going to keep this. The private section is for when we create some private builds. So once I have all this, I can actually save my build. It's going to show up in my demo, my simple website here. I can actually just queue that build. And on the queue window, we can see that we can pick a new definition if we wanted to. We can decide which source we want to take. So we could basically apply a shelf set if we wanted to, or basically just the latest source, which is the default. We could change the controller. We could change the priority and put it high or above the normal priority. So if there's a bunch of builds that are queued, the next one, if it's on high, this would bypass it and actually build this one before the other ones. The last one is the actual drops folder. I could change that to go somewhere else. In the parameters section, we're going to have a list of the different parameters, the default parameters from the process template we kind of looked at. And from here, I can override parameters for this particular version of the build. So I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to queue this build. So the build that actually starts, I can actually just double click on it and we can look at it. We can see the different log as it's showing up here. That's the team build XAML log process. And once the build is finished, as we can see over here, we have the actual results of our build. We can actually open the section here, view the build log. This is the MS build log. So if we have an error, we can actually come over here and look at it. Here we have the results of our test if we ran any, and the code results as well. If there was any impacted tests, we would see them over here. I can actually view the full log by actually just looking at view log. We have everything that happened in the XAML script. And then finally, we can just open this and view the result of our build. In this case, I have my website, which I can actually see the results over here. And I have the published website, which I can actually just go in and look at all my ASPX, my web configs over here, and then my bin file. So this is the actual result of the build. And finally, we can change the quality if we needed to, and we can come over here and mark this build as something that we're actually going to deploy later on, and we want to bypass the retention policy. So by doing retain indefinitely, we can mark this build as bypassing the actual retention policy here. And finally, the diagnostic is opening up our logs. And in the logs, we have the log I just opened, the MS build log that I opened, and then the agents logs that we can actually, that produce this report in the back here. So this is essentially what the build looks like. So in conclusion, in this video, I showed you how to create a new build. And if you need more information about team build or how to create a new build definition, you can actually navigate to those URLs. Thank you for your attention.